Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Jason. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, Web Application Scanning Automation. And so without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and just jump right into things. Today, we're going to take a look at some ways that we can automate some of our scanning routines. We're going to ask the question, why would we want to do this? Take a look at a couple of reasons why we would do that. Review some automation-specific features of a couple tools that we tend to use, as part of a lot of common automation scripts. We're going to look at Nmap and Nikto, and then we're going to dive right into actually developing a small beginner bash script that you can then use to modify for your own tools, your own purposes, and kind of use it as a staging ground to build on, any of the things that you might do in your penetration tests, or maybe even adapt it to incident response type things or other instances where you may want to automate certain processes within your daily job activities. So to start out, who am I? Timothy McKenzie. I'm a consultant with SecureWorks. Work with, kind of run what we call our red team operations and focus on some of the more higher end penetration tests, no holds barred type situations to where we can try to throw everything but the kitchen sink at organizations and see how we can get in and demonstrate the risk associated with attackers in those environments. Have 20 plus years of experience in information technology and information security. 7 of those years have been focused as penetration testing. Some of the other stuff just verifies that I am certifiable, and most of you if anybody on here knows me, then you could probably concur with that assessment. So commonly the question comes up, well, why would we automate? And as pen testers, we tend to give this response of, I am lazy. And I kind of like that response because, when we are lazy, it kind of, we can leverage these things and make us a little bit more efficient. But there's also a better answer out there besides just, simply appeasing your own time constraints and things like that. And when we look at the OWASP testing methodology, within it has some objectives. The objectives are that we want our testing to be consistent, reproducible, rigorous, and under quality control. And so when we can implement automation into our methodology, we can take that automation and be able to help achieve some of those goals. The script is going to tend to do the same tasks in a consistent way. We can run the same script against multiple targets or against the same target and get the same or similar results. We can then also implement some of the rigor into that script to be able to make sure that we get over a breadth of testing within the application. And then it also can be reviewed by others, right? So somebody else can come along and take a look at our script and go, oh, what about this that you may not be doing? And so then you can adapt your script and add some additional features and things like that as part of the methodology that you're implementing for your pen testing activities. And what I'm going to present is not dedicated to just web application penetration testing. You can adapt it to any of the other methodologies that are out there, for network-based pen testing and other activities that you might do, as I mentioned, maybe for incident response things or, any routine tasks that you need to run in a fairly consistent way. You can go in and develop some automation as part of that. Let's start looking at kind of the beginnings of, some of the tools that we're going to use as part of our automation. For this webinar, we're going to focus on 2 tools that are fairly common, Nmap and Nikto. And we're going to look at how we can leverage some of the features that are the switches and capabilities in it that are more friendly to automation. One of the first things that we have to do to start automating a process is we have to way to feed our script the targets that we're going to focus on. And so, a lot of times with web app pen tests, the target is fed to us, here's a domain name, here's a URL, and go in and attack. But sometimes we do web app pen testing for the purposes of going in and, trying to breach a perimeter or something along those lines, try to find a vulnerability in a web application. So we can leverage some of these same things potentially with our activities. And so we may have to go out and acquire targets, manually or get them from our clients or things like that. But we want to store that information in a usable format. Usually, plain text files are suitable for most of our purposes. But if you start getting into, maybe some very sophisticated automation or maybe some custom tools, perhaps you need to then start putting those into maybe XML or JSON or some other format that might be usable within maybe that larger construct. Nmap has a ton of features and a lot of options and switches, and we're not going to focus on a lot of those. We're going to focus on two switches that are very helpful for automation, and we're going to start out with the -i capital L switch. And what this switch does is we can then pass a file name to Nmap and say, hey, I want you to go out and perform this scan that you're configured to scan on the targets that are listed in this file. And you can configure the information in that file with one target per line, or you can space or tab delimit your targets within that file, and it can be in any of the notations that Nmap will accept, CIDR notation, domain names, IP addresses, et cetera. And so you can populate all of that information in a file. Then the other switch that is kind of relevant to this is the -o capital A switch, which tells Nmap to go ahead and take your output and drop it into 3 different formats. And it'll drop it into, kind of the human readable default Nmap format that you see when Nmap's outputting the results to the screen. It'll also drop it into greppable format and XML format. And of course, you could pick and choose any one of those formats to export. I tend to like to export it in all 3 because I end up finding down the road, oh man, I need it in this other format. And if I already have it available, then I don't have to go and change formats or go rerun scans or other things. I already have all of the outputs ready to go that I can then use for any tools or any type of automation or other things that I want to use the Nmap scan results for. So now we'll go ahead and take a look at Nikto. Nikto is a web application vulnerability scanner that was developed by Chris Sulo, and you can see the project location on GitHub, and it's available for you to go download. There's quite extensive documentation on cert.net that you can go and take a look at. Nikto has quite a few features and capabilities that, as I was preparing for this presentation, I learned some new things that Nikto could do as I was going through some of the documentation and things like that. So encourage you to go out and take a look at some of those documents and kind of learn some new features about Nikto. Nikto will go out and perform vulnerability scanning, and it leverages plugins that are in 13 different categories. And you can see the list of categories here on the screen. And you can, by default, Nikto will go in and run all of those different categories when you just run Nikto without any options. But you can also go in and specify particular plugins that you want to run. And so perhaps you have a specific category of vulnerabilities that you want to scan a particular targets for. And you don't want to waste a lot of time scanning for some of the other things that maybe you're not interested in, or maybe you already have that information through another source. So you can go in and use the capital T switch with Nikto and then specify any of the plugin categories. And the way that you do that is by just putting in the number or letter associated with each of those different plugin categories with no spaces, just kind of line them up. And you can see on the screen here how we have down near the bottom the -T at the end of the Nikto command. And then we've got 189, B as in Baker, C as in Charlie. And so based on that, we're going to go in and run Nikto, and it's going to look for interesting files. It's going to go in and test for command injection, SQL injection, and then look for software identification issues, and then also look for remote source inclusion within the targets that are specified. Nikto also has some more fine-grained control over the plugins, where you can use the -plugin switch with a capital P, and in there you can go in and specify various plugins, and some of those plugins actually have parameters that you can pass to them. And in the example at the very bottom of the slide, you can see that we're passing it, the plugin switch with dictionary, and then we're passing it to the dictionary parameter and then giving it a pass to a dictionary. And then what Nikto will do is go in and use that dictionary as it's going through for things like force browsing and things like that to try to find content, rather than using its built-in dictionary that is available. It'll use your custom one that you've plugged in with that parameter. One of the things that's most frustrating when you set up automation in scripts is when the script pauses and is waiting for input or waiting for somebody to do something. And so with Nikto, there's a couple of places where it might stop and prompt you for something. And so we want to prevent those interruptions. One of the places that Nikto will pause is if it is out there scanning various software applications and it comes up and detects a banner that it hasn't seen and isn't in its database. It'll prompt you and say, hey, do you want me to submit this new banner to cert.net so that they can include it in the database? Well, for these purposes, we want to just tell it, no, don't do that. Just go ahead and proceed with your scanning. And then we also have, we can do that with the -ask space no switch. And then we also have the -no interactive switch, which will disable any other prompts that might pop up within Nikto. Nikto also has the capability to go in and configure it instead of through command line switches through a configuration file. And so you can go in and configure a configuration file. By default, Nikto will look for the configuration file in 3 different locations. It'll look in /etc nikto.conf. It'll look in $home/nikto.conf. And it'll also look in the path that the Nikto executable's in and for nikto.conf. You can also specify a path to your custom configuration file. So maybe you have a folder of special configuration files that you use for different purposes, and you can use the -config switch to be able to then point Nikto to whichever configuration file that you want to run. And running vulnerability scans is kind of useless unless you can get the output so that you can use it. And with Nikto, it has a lot of flexibility in how you can get the information out of it to be able to report it. One of the things that you can do is specify the format that you want the file to be built in, and it's got several options for that. You can output in HTML or HTML format, comma-separated values, or XML. And then it also has some options for the file name, how you would specify the file name that you want Nikto to store it in. And so you can use the -output switch to be able to specify a file name, or instead of putting your own file name at the end, you can put a dot. And what the dot does is it instructs Nikto to go ahead and build a file name based on the host information that is specified in the syntax. And then it'll dump all of the results for anything that it scans in that session into that file. And so you can kind of see here how, we've got the host designation here to where, it's 2018-727 nmap tcp.gnmap. And with the dot here at the end, you can see that Nikto has created a file name that starts with Nikto, and then it's included that same host name in there as what is specified by the host switch. And then it adds some date information at the end. If you had put in an IP address or something like that, it would have put that host information after Nikto instead of the file name to the nmap file that you specified here. And you can specify multiple formats at the same time. And so as you can see here in the example, we specified the HTML, CSV, and XML formats, and Nikto went out and created 3 different files in 3 different formats and provided all of those results for us in those different files for us. How many times have you sat there and run a vulnerability scanner against a system and you're looking at some of the results that are returned by the vulnerability scanner and you're kind of scratching your head going, okay, I see what's going on here, but I'm not quite sure how it got these results. And maybe you're interacting with it in your interception proxy and trying to kind of figure out exactly what's going on, how to exploit the vulnerability, and just wish that you knew exactly what on earth it was that the vulnerability scanner threw at the application to be able to get that result or to find that finding. Well, Nikto actually has a really cool feature built in to where you can save a replay file for any of the findings that it reports back to you. And so it's not going to save every single request, but when it returns back a finding, it'll go ahead and save a replay file that is associated with that particular finding. And so you can go in and specify -save and then give it a directory to save the requests in, or similarly to the output switch, you can add a dot to the end of that and Nikto will go ahead and automatically name the directory for you. And then for every finding that it has, it'll drop a save file in there that has the information that you can then import into your interception proxy, so that you can analyze that and continue on with exploitation. Or you might even be able to front end Nikto with maybe your interception proxy, and then use Nikto's replay.pl script, and it'll replay that save file, and then you're able to then watch how that happens in your interception proxy, and then continue verifying the vulnerability or further exploiting it. And so this can be very helpful when you have a Nikto scan that's running out across a whole lot of different systems, and maybe you want to hone in on a particular finding that it reported and see exactly how it got those results and reported that finding. A couple other options that can be useful, changing your custom user agent. When you look at Nikto, by default, it includes this Nikto with the version information in the user agent field. If there's any IDSs or IPSs in the way that might interfere with your ability to find results through Nikto, it might just start dropping all of the traffic. So sometimes changing the user agent can help out with that. And you can also front end Nikto with a proxy, perhaps your interception proxy. And so then you can see all of the requests that go from Nikto to the target and record all of that information. Use a little bit of prudence with this, as your interception proxies, typically they're Java-based applications, and you fill them up with a ton of requests and things like that. Sometimes it can become unstable, run out of memory, crash, things like that. So your mileage may vary with that, but it is an option that is available to you. Now that we're done with some of the kind of introductory stuff, setting the scene of some of the switches, some of the things that we can use through our automation scripts, let's go ahead and dive right into actually building a script. Our goal is that we want to build a script that can go out, use a list of targets that's stored in a file, discover some web-based services that are out there, and then test those services with the tool Nikto. To start out, we're going to build some variables, and we're going to build some variables to store the ports that we want to focus on and to capture the date so that we can use the date in the timestamp for our file names. I like to have the date as part of my file name so that it's very easy for me to go back and see when I ran particular items, if there's any questions about it, to keep kind of a good flow of the different tools that I've ran and the order that I've ran them. It just kind of helps my workflow. And another thing to kind of note here as I'm going through these next slides and talking about building a script, obviously Bash is very portable, very got a lot of different capabilities and features and things. So some of the ways that I'm demonstrating how to do these things, there may be shortcuts, there are other ways of doing it. I've chosen kind of the way to do this to help it to be more readable on the screen and to kind of present the concept in a way that's easier to talk about. So if you have shortcuts or other things that you're familiar with and want to, adapt the scripts and things like that on your end, please feel free to do all of that, because, making these scripts personal to you and something that is, part of you is going to make them more useful to you and something that you're going to turn to more readily than, just stealing scripts that, other people write. And so jumping into it, we're going to start off our script with, specifying where our Bash interpreter is, and then set up the ports variable, and we're going to assign it a string of 80 space 443. And so this will set us up so that we can iterate through these two values and use them later in a loop. And then also we're going to set the cur date variable for current date. And what it's going to do is go in and run a command. So this $ parentheses will go in and run a command and then return whatever is the results of that command and assign it equal to this variable. And so the command that we're going to run is the date command. And we're going to format the date in the year, month, date format so that we can then include that in our cur date variable. The first thing we want to do is to find the web services that exist on our targets. So we're going to assume that we have a targets.txt file that is in the same directory as our scripts for the purposes of this exercise. And inside that targets.txt file, it's going to have a list of host names, IP addresses, net blocks, or whatever that defines the targets that we're going to focus on for our automation script. So then the next thing that we're going to add to our script is our nmap command. And you can see that it's fairly standard command. We're going to specify the -il switch here that specifies our target.txt file so that we can pull in all our targets. And then we're also going to use the -OA switch here to then specify that we want to output all of Nmap's results to the three common formats, the human readable, the greppable, and the XML format. Then here we specify our $cur date variable. So this is the variable that we created on the previous slide that has the current date within it. This backslash here is required to be able to tell Bash that the variable name has ended. Otherwise, Bash will go in and look for the variable curdate _ nmap _ TCP, which doesn't exist. And so we need this backslash to kind of delimit the expansion of this variable, and then to add in that the tool is nmap and that we ran a TCP scan on the target system. The next thing that we need to do in our script is to be able to analyze the results of the nmap scan. So as the script's running, it's going to run nmap, it's going to go out and scan all of the targets, and in theory, it's going to find some web services. And then we need to go in and find each of the hosts that are listening on web-based ports. In this case, we're going to focus just on ports 80 and 443 to kind of keep things simple, to kind of illustrate things. Obviously, you can expand this to any number of ports or other things that you may need to do for your particular targets. So in this case, we're going to leverage grep to search through the nmap results that are in the greppable format, and we're going to initially look for port 80. And so we can go in and we can grep for 80/open, which is the syntax that is used within the greppable format of nmap's output. And we're going to then specify our file that nmap outputted in the greppable format. And when we do that, if there happens to be a host in there that has port 80 open, then what we'll see is the grep command will return, host, and we'll give the IP address and the information about the ports that are open on that particular host. But all we really want is the IP address, because we're going to feed that IP address to Nikto so that Nikto knows what target to scan. And so we need to pull that IP address out of the results of the grep command. And so what we want to do then is, as we go in and we are grepping for port 80 in our greppable format file, there's a whole host of different ways to do this. One of the easiest ways that I found that's to explain and is easy to read is with the cut command. And so we can go in and take our grep command, where we look for port 80 that's open, and pipe the results of that through the cut command. And we'll specify a delimiter of space. And as we look at how this comes together, we have our delimiter of space. And if we go back and look at the grep output, we can see that the IP address has a space on either side of it. So it kind of is delimiting that IP address in the results of the grep output. And then we want to go in and look at field 2. And so as we look at this space delimited output, we've got host is in field 1, the IP address is in field 2. And so the results of this command are our IP address that we pulled out of the nmap results file. There's ways that you can do it. Like I said, there's a bazillion different ways that you can, skin this cat, so to say. And, here's an example of a way to do it with awk, which is a little bit shorter, and so I'll use it in the actual script that we're building going forward. And the way that this works is we use awk, and we're going to go in and tell awk, I want you to search for port 80, and we have to escape the slash because we're using slashes to delimit the search parameters with awk. So anything in between these two slashes is what is going to be searched for. So we've got to escape this other slash so that we actually search for a 80/open. And then it'll go in and it'll look for any lines that have 80/open in them. And then we're going to print the second field that are pulled out of awk's results. And then we tell it what file we want it to search, and that's our nmap output file that's in greppable format. And we get the same results here of our 10.10.10.10. The next component to our script is the ability to kind of iterate through a set of items. And the way that we can do that in Bash is with the for loop. We've got a very simple example of a for loop so that we can take a data set, a set of items, and be able to iterate through each of the items in that set and then perform some sort of an action. And so looking at how this works, when we take a look at this for loop, we're going to specify the for command. And then we're going to assign a variable. Here we've got the variable A, and this can be anything. You can, put in, whatever words in here that you want that kind of designate the, the variable. Obviously, staying away from keywords within the Bash operating system, but essentially you can use pretty much whatever designators you want here for this variable name. Then we use the keyword in, so we're going to specify that what comes after this is the items that we want to iterate through. And so we have hello space there. So it's a string that is space delimited. And then we tell the for loop we're going to use the do keyword here to then do something. In this case, we're going to echo the results of our variable $A. So what's going to happen is this for loop is going to go in and iterate through each of these parameters that are these items that are available, and then echo the results of that. And so hello will be iterated first. It'll get dropped into the variable A, and then it'll echo hello. And then it'll go through and find there, drop that into the variable A, and then echo there. And you can see the results here. We got hello, and then there. The semicolons in here are used to separate the command. They can actually be replaced with carriage returns when you're either at the command line or in a script. And especially in a script, it can make the for loop a whole lot easier to read because you can then put the do statement on a separate line. And you'll see this in the sample script that I will show here in a couple slides. And then you can use some space formatting to make it a lot easier to read as you go through things. You can also use a for loop to iterate through items in a file or through the items that are returned by a command. And so at the very bottom of the screen, you can see that I'm using the $parentheses notation here to execute a command. And in this case, I'm just running ls-1, which will grab all the contents of the files and directories in the current path, and then return that list back. And then, so what this will do is it will take the first entry in the list, drop it in the variable A, and then, echo the entry that's returned by the ls command. So this for loop isn't very useful because it actually just does what ls-1 would do, but I included it as just an example to kind of illustrate that you could run a command and that you can get those results and be able to do something with those based on the output of a command. Now we're going to take the for loop and kind of put some of this together. And as we look at this, we're going to specify that we're going to run a for loop, and then we're going to create a variable here called test port. And this test port is going to get assigned it whatever is iterated through in the ports variable. Do you remember the ports variable, right? At the very beginning of setting up the script, we assigned it to a string value of 80 space 443. And so what will happen in here in this for loop is it'll go to the first entry in the ports variable when it's expanded, and it'll grab 80 and it'll drop 80 into this test port variable. And then we'll use it later in our for loop. And in this case, what we've done is we've nested the for loop. So we're going to go in and iterate through each of the ports that are specified in the ports variable, and then we're going to do something else with that. Well, what we want to do with that is find the hosts that are listening on those ports. So in this case, port 80 and 443. So we'll create another for loop, and we'll assign it the variable target IP. And what's going to go into target IP is the results of this command. And you can see that we're using the $parentheses notation here for this particular command. And you might recognize this command as the one that we used awk for to go in and pull out the host IP address out of the nmap greppable file. And so we can go in and take a look at this command. We can see that it's leveraging the variable test port. So remember that we got the variable ports that's iterating through 80 and 443, getting dropped into test port. Then we're taking that value, and as we're iterating through the first for loop, we're going to go in and drop it into this awk command to then look for port 80 in our greppable output from nmap and look for 443 in that same file as it's iterating through these loops. Note that I pulled out the test port from the string delimiters here, the single ticks, and There are other ways of handling this. This was the easiest way to make it easy to see what is actually happening here. But because we want the variable to expand, if you put this variable inside the single ticks, Bash won't expand the variable. And so then you'll just get $testport, and it's not going to find that in the greppable nmap file. And so so make sure that if you're copying this and using this later, that you have the single ticks that will break out of the awk string, drop your port number in there, and then resume the string that you're using to search, and then output the results from the nmap greppable file. Next, we go in and we actually run our Nikto command. So in this case, we're going to run Nikto. We're going to specify the -host switch, which tells Nikto what to go in and scan. Then we're going to specify our target IP variable, which is what gets assigned based on the results of this command up here in this second for loop. We're going to tell Nikto we don't want you to bother us with any interaction, so -ask no and -no interactive. And in this case, Nikto, with this loop in place, assuming that there are hosts that are listening on port 80 and 443 with results in our nmap results file, Nikto will go ahead and run against those targets. And this is what our script looks like up to this point. And so you can see, as we kind of built each of those things individually, just defining our variables, running our nmap scan, and then our for loops, you can see that I broke out the for loops with the carriage returns instead of the semicolons, and it makes it a little bit easier to read and see what is happening within each of those for loops and each of those commands that's running. However, we're not done yet, because there are some issues with what we have so far. Remember I talked about the user agent string. The current script doesn't do anything to try to avoid any of the defenses that might be in place that might be triggering on Nikto being in the user agent string. So we need to go in and modify the Nikto command to add in the user agent switch and put in a user agent string. And you can go to all sorts of resources on the internet. I've suggested one here that you could go to and use to find user agent strings that are available out in the wild. Sometimes it can be interesting to scan a target with different user agent strings, maybe with one for a mobile app, maybe one for, or from a mobile device, or maybe one from, say, Google, and then maybe one from a web browser on another type of system. And so kind of sometimes you might see different results, different websites that are returned based on the user agent string. The other thing that we didn't do with the first iteration of the script was to save off the output. And so we want our output saved to a file so that we can use it later and refer to it and be able to have a list of all of the findings. And so in this case, we're going to specify that we're going to use the HTM format. And you can see here that we've got format HTM. And then we're going to use the -output switch to then specify a file name. And we're going to, instead of letting Nikto specify the file name, we're going to give it a file name. And in this case, we're going to leverage our curDate variable to specify we want the current date to be in the file name, specify that we ran the tool Nikto. We're going to use our $target IP variable that was part of our for loop. And then we're also going to leverage our test port variable that was part of our for loop so that we get the IP address of the target and the port that we scanned in the file name. And so it will make it very easy to look through a list of files and identify what date we ran, the tool that we used, the target that we scanned, and the port that we scanned on based on those results. The other thing that we didn't do was to give Nikto any way to tell which protocol is going to need to be used to interact with the web server. And so we need to be able to go in and tell Nikto, hey, I need you to use port, HTTP for port 80, and I need you to go ahead and use HTTPS for port 443. The easiest way to do that is in the host switch to add the port to the host name designation. And so you can see here how we've gone in and with the host switch specified $target IP, and then the colon to designate the ports coming afterwards, and then the test port variable that comes from our for loop. And then Nikto will go in and assume that anything on port 80 is using HTTP, and anything on port 443 is using HTTPS. A little bit more advanced way to do that would be to go in and do a test for the test port variable and look for, you can do various things with this test, looking for different values and things like that, but to look for maybe port 443, and then if it finds port 443, go ahead and echo -SSL. And because we've nested this within the $parentheses tags here to tell it, bash, I want you to run this command, and then whatever is output drop into the command line, it'll actually end up adding -SSL space to the Nikto command line. And then you can, maybe if you have a bunch of systems on port 8443, and you can look for port 8443 and then automatically drop the -SSL switch into the Nikto command line. For simplicity's sake, we're going to just go ahead and use the first option in the script that we're building. And when we go back and take a look at this, we can see that our finished script, we now have Nikto modified so that we can go in and take a look at, we're telling Nikto that we want it to focus on the target IP and the test port, so that now Nikto is aware of the port that we're trying to scan. It's going to ignore all the stuff that, that happens that might prompt a user or interrupt its execution. We've got a user agent specified here. The format is specified as HTML, and then we've got our output file that we want to drop everything to. And if we were to assume that that the contents of this script were dropped into a file called test.sh, you can see that down here, and we had a file named targets.txt within the same directory, and within targets.txt we had the entry hack.me, so you can see hack.me here. Then when we run that script, we would expect to see these files within in the directory, and we can see that Nmap went in and dropped its output into the 3 different formats: XML, human readable, and greppable. And then Nikto went out and scanned this system on this IP on this port and returned those results in HTML format within this directory. But there's some alternatives to this, right? As we look at how this comes together, I went through and did some things to kind of demonstrate some flexibility and some different things that you might be able to do, by specifying ports and things like that. But as we all know, web services don't always sit on port 80 and 443, and so there are some additional ways that we could attack this problem. And on this slide, we present an alternative way that we could do that. And if you look at the script that's provided here, if you notice, we don't have the ports variable specified at the very beginning of the script. We only have the curdate variable. And if we go in and we look at the Nmap script, Nmap line, that one looks the same. We're just going in, running Nmap against the targets. It's going to do its default scan and return those results back and output them in the 3 formats. But then with the Nikto command, one of the things that we're doing differently here is that we're on the host designation, after the host switch, we're actually just providing it the greppable Nmap format of Nmap's results here. And so what this will do is Nikto will actually go in and interpret the Nmap results file, find any of the instances where HTTP or HTTPS are designated or identified within that output file, and then go in and do the scanning for us. There's a couple things that are cool about this, and one is it automatically knows which protocol to use, right, based on the designation within Nmap's file, whether it's HTTP or HTTPS. It also isn't limited to port 80 and 443 any longer for its scans, right? So now it'll go in and find any of the ports that Nmap identifies as using using HTTP or HTTPS and those associated ports, and go ahead and set those up as targets for what it's going to scan. In this command, we use the default things to kind of tell Nikto not to interrupt us as you're scanning. We got our user agent. We've got our format as HTML, and we're also specifying in the output file that we're going to just let Nikto handle the naming of the file. And so what will happen in this case is Nikto will create a file based on, as we saw on the previous slides, based on this name that was specified in the host parameter. And then every system that it scans that it found HTTP and HTTPS on within this file, it'll store all of those results in that single file. And so that it kind of provides some constraints there. If we needed to be able to take those results and divide them out amongst different individuals, it's all in one file, so it's harder to break out. So there's a little bit of loss of flexibility there. I kind of like being able to kind of iterate through the different ports and the different things, and be able to separate each host and each port that is scanned into separate files. My workflow, it works a little bit better. But we have several different options for you as you go through and look at setting up this automation and setting up your own scripts in how you want things to run. So as we look at automation and other things that might be interesting to include in part of this, one of the tools that's commonly used to scan for vulnerabilities is Nessus. And Nessus has the ability to have Nikto integrated into it. So there's a Nikto .nasl file that you can then bring into Nessus. And so if you're already using Nessus as part of maybe your port scans and other vulnerability scans, you can add Nikto to that process and just let Nessus go ahead and run Nikto and pull all those results in for you. The other cool thing is that there's some integrations with Metasploit. So Nikto can output to XML format, and you can take that XML file and import it into Metasploit with the db import command. And now you have your Nikto results in Metasploit. And if you're using Metasploit for, the kind of the centralization of your attack operations against an organization, you have all of that target information, everything already right there and imported, ready for you to use. We've looked at several different things associated with automation. We've looked at, going in and leveraging it to perform discovery scans and, feed in a web application scanner. Some basic customizations of different ways that we can run this to get the script to do different things or the tool to do different things and return the data in different ways that may fit our method of organizing all of the information associated with a pen test, to what suits us. So your homework is to kind of take these, the shell script that we have available to you, going to post it online and everything, and be able to take it, tweak it, modify it, and make it, your own scripts. Add your own tools in there. Maybe you use W3AF or some other types of tools as part of your automated scans, and you're used to going in and typing these things in manually and running them. Now you can take this shell of a script and plug in your own tools and work it and expand it and grow your own methodology to be able to have your own scripts, your own things that will help you as you go through your penetration tests. And that takes us to the end of our presentation. My contact information is here and available to you. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jason for Q&A. Thank you, everybody, very much for your time.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Timothy. If you have questions, feel free to ask them now. We already have a few that have come in. We'd love to get to as many of the questions as possible. The Q&A portion is why you should tune in live instead of just listening to the recording, if you can tune in live. So, Timothy, first question, do you have to run Nmap 3 times to get the 3 formats?
Excellent question. No, one of the cool things about the dash lowercase o capital A switch is that it'll actually take those results and output all 3 formats at the same time. So one scan, you get the results in 3 different formats.
Awesome. Next question from Benjamin. Do you have other scripts available for web and network penetration testing?
So I have all sorts of little snippets and things like that that are probably more embarrassing than anything out on my GitHub site. You can, my GitHub site is out there with a bunch of little snippets of different things that I use from time to time. I don't have that link up here available, but you can go on GitHub and search for Timbo05, and I should pop up there as pretty high in the search results. And I've got a whole bunch of kind of just notes and things that I've picked up over the years that I post out there.
So Timothy, when you say you pick up over the years, is that something where you wrote it yourself because you needed it one day, or you found it and you used it and you were like, wow, I should keep a hold of this? Is there a difference between the two?
So there's a mix of both. I mean, as pen testers, we tend to cannibalize a lot of the stuff that's out there. I owe a credit to whole lot of different people in IT and information security to the things that I've collected over the years. So where possible, I'll note, where it came from. And then, but there's stuff that I've built, stuff that I've found and other things that people have contributed that are all out there.
Awesome. From Ivan, besides Bash, what other programming language do you recommend to run automated tools when performing scans?
So it's really good to become familiar with, Bash if you're sitting on Linux. I also exercise my skills with Batch. So from the Windows side of things, there's a lot of times where I need to automate things and I'm on a Windows system or got a shell on a Windows box and I need to automate some sort of process. So learning the differences in for loops between Bash and Batch, which kind of sound like the same, but B-A-S-H versus B-A-T-C-H. And then another good scripting language that is really helpful is Python. A lot of the pen testing tools are written in Python, so if you understand Python, you can go in and modify the tools. Plus, Python has a lot of already standard built-in libraries that are that we use for typical things in penetration tests and targeting systems. To stand up a web server or to stand up a web client is just a couple lines of code, and you can fairly easily do that and then be able to adapt that to your own testing purposes and your own automation and methodologies. So those are kind of the three top ones that stick out to me. Obviously, there's a lot of other options out there with Ruby for Metasploit, and there's a lot of people that write things in Perl and things like that. But if you understand Bash, Batch, and Python, it's going to get you a long way down the road.
Yeah. So for everyone listening, we do Python webcasts periodically. So we did one yesterday with Mark Baggett, the author of our Python for InfoSec course. So if you go to our YouTube page or search for SANS Pen Test on Twitter at SANS Pentest, you'll see the links to the archived webcast on Python. Timothy, well, first I'm going to ask everyone listening, if you enjoyed today's webcast, please let us know in the comments. You can either just put it in the chat or in the questions. Just let us know what you thought. But if you have ideas for future webcasts, please let us know that too, because I know that Timothy will take your feedback and say, oh, people want to know this. And so it will give him ideas for creating his next webcast. So that would be super helpful there. So David asked, can we post that Python link in the chat? Sure, I will post that in the chat. And if you're listening to the archived version of this, you can do a search for Python SANS Pentest webcast. Timothy, one of the questions is, I know that you have some courses coming up. Could you bring up the webpage for us real quick and just show people how they could take a class with you if they wanted to?
Absolutely. So let me get my mouse over here. So here's the page that has my courses upcoming that I'm teaching over the next several months. I focus on 542 as the main course that I teach, which is the Web App Pen Testing course.
Awesome. So we got comments coming in. That's really cool. From Alexander, I did enjoy this and have I marked as one to rewatch. So thank you very much. So Timothy, one of my last questions, unless other people have them, is what are some ways that you've automated in web app? You've talked about a lot, but is there like one that it's the first thing you do whenever you're on a pen test? Like, I'm just going to automate this as the first step.
Absolutely. So I have a script that's very similar to this one that I use. It has some other things that are built into it. Goes out and it does, like I suggested. It runs W3AF. It also runs some tests against common SSL things and just some various other tidbits of information that are helpful during a pen test. And so and I have a whole library and collection of for loops and things like that I've worked out, that I've run that do very specific functions, like being able to perform LDAP queries in Active Directory if I'm on a Windows box through PowerShell, and just all sorts of different little scriptlets or scripts that I've written that I use throughout everything that I do.
We got some great comments coming in. Thank you so much for posting those. Looks like if no one else has any questions, we have one from Mitchell, and he just says, have you scripted Hydra?
So Hydra has a lot of its own capabilities built into it to kind of iterate through hosts and targets and passwords and things like that. So most of the time with Hydra, I'm going to leverage its own capabilities to specify files that include the targets and the other things that I want to target. But because it's command line driven and you can specify, the target. The target system and the target port and the username and password on the command line, there's no reason that you couldn't write a for loop or some other loop to be able to iterate through those values if you so chose to do that.
Excellent. We got another question that came in, and that is the beauty of listening live. Any recommendations any recommended reading for Bash or Hatch or PowerShell or Python?
So I'm a firm believer of necessity is kind of the mother of invention. How I've gotten really good at a lot of these things is by, needing to do some sort of task and then sitting down and figuring out how to do it in. Google is a fantastic resource to go out and, you can type in pretty much, I want to do X, Y, and Z, and stuff starts coming back. Sometimes you have to kind of use a little bit of Google foo to kind of cull that out. But I found that, reading books about programming don't help me learn programming. Nothing against anybody that has written a programming book, but it doesn't help me learn it. What helps me to learn it is to actually sit down and write scripts and to write code and be able to leverage the tools that are available to me on the internet and other sources to be able to pull it together. So that's kind of my feedback on kind of learning how to do some of the scripting and things like that.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point. I get a chance to go to a lot of NetWars tournaments, and you have no idea how fast you can Google when all of a sudden there's a scoreboard and you're scoring points. Like I've seen people all of a sudden they've learned and taught themselves things that they never thought they would know just because they want to get through level 1 or level 2 of NetWars as fast as they humanly can. So.
Absolutely, been there myself.
So with that said, Timothy, do you have any last words for everyone before we turn it over to Carol?
No, just to thank everybody for their participation. I appreciate coming and feel free to reach out to me. And if you have anything down the road, feel free to attend any of my classes. Be happy to see you in one of my courses coming up. Absolutely. And if you do attend one of his classes, let him know that you found out about it during this webcast. All right, Carol, it's over to you, and thank you all very much for listening today.
All right, thank you so much, Timothy, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.